Welcome back. In the last video we saw how to use Final Gathering, how to start it up, how to tweak it, set it up, change some of the parameters to change the look of it, the speed at which it rendered, the quality. We got to see a lot of cool stuff about Final Gathering. Now we're going to see something even better. How to use Final Gathering in combination with the mental ray physical sun and sky system to get ourselves very realistic outdoor lighting. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's open up a new scene here. And the scene you want to go ahead and open up is going to be called 5 Scene FG City Start. So let's go ahead and open up that scene number 5. Okay, and here we go. I'm going to switch to shaded view here. And I'm going to go ahead and do a render. And this is what we have. Not very exciting. So let's go to the render settings. I'm going to turn off my default light as usual in the common tab. Okay, I'm going to go to indirect lighting. And if I do a quick IPR here, we're going to see we get nothing but pure black. So let's close that window down. Just what we expected. Let's collapse global illumination there. And there's our Final Gathering parameter. We're not going to activate it right now. Maya is going to go ahead and do that for us automatically in a moment. If you notice in the indirect lighting tab here, above global illumination, we have this section for environment. We have a couple of options, image-based lighting and physical sun and sky. That's the one that we're interested in. So we have this big button here on the right that says create. So let's go ahead and press it. When we hit create, the attribute editor opens up for a couple of things here. A sun direction and an MIA physical sky 1. Let's close that window just for the moment here. Now let's do another IPR. See what we have. Very, very interesting. Now that looks pretty neat. What we basically do is create a realistic outdoor sky lighting system, complete with a sky and a sun. Let's go over here and switch our accuracy raise to 32 for Final Gathering just to get faster renders. Okay, and what we're interested in now is in changing and tweaking the parameters here for the physical sun and sky. So let me close the render settings window. We really aren't going to need it too much for the moment. Let me close this as well. Now, what happened? Well, let me show you what happened. Let me go ahead and let's go to Window. Let's go to Rendering Editors and Hypershade. Let's go ahead and open up the Hypershade here so we can see what's going on. Okay? And what I'll do is I'll click on this icon up here that shows the top and bottom tabs. That way we can see the top tab here and the work area down here. So we can see materials in this tab. If we go to Textures, we can see textures. There are none in the scene right now, so it's blank. And then we have utilities. And in utilities, we have 3 objects here that were not here before. There's the MIA exposure symbol, the MIA physical sky, and the MIA physical sun. What are these 3 things? Well, all 3 of these things are shaders. When we create a physical sun and sky system through the render settings, if you remember when we went to the render settings, we clicked on this big button that used to say create. Okay? When we did that, Maya created 3 things. First thing it created was the mental ray exposure shader. Now we got to see the exposure shader. You were introduced to it in the video when we started with global illumination and we worked on the apartment scene. In the last video in that series, we got to see how to apply an exposure shader to our camera. So if we go over here to our viewport, let's minimize the hypershade there. If we go over here to our viewport, go to the view menu, click on select camera and hit Control A to open up the attribute editor here. And we scroll all the way down to the mental ray section here. We expand that. You'll notice that now there's an environment shader and it's the physical sky. We'll also notice there's a lens shader, which is the MIA exposure simple, or the mental ray simple exposure shader. That's the one that we got to see in the apartment scene when we were working on global illumination, if you remember. Okay? So creating this system automatically through the render settings here by hitting this big create button allowed us to create this very realistic physical sun and sky system. Let me close that. Let me bring back the hypershade here. So this exposure shader is automatically applied to our camera. This physical sky shader is also applied to our camera through the environment slot. And if we go ahead and double click on it to open up its attribute editor, we can see we have quite a large number of options here to control the physical sky. If we go ahead and double click on the physical sun shader over here in the hypershade, we have a few parameters as well. You also notice that there's these yellow parameters. These yellow parameters, what they mean is that they're being controlled and they're connected to something else. What are they connected to? They're connected to the physical sky shader over here. The physical sky shader is controlling all of these yellow attributes. It's controlling the multiplier, the haze, the red-blue shift, saturation, and even the horizon height. Okay? So we're going to look at how to control these parameters, but we're going to look at how to control them from here in the physical sky shader. Because you can see, if you look carefully, you'll notice that the physical sun and the physical sky, which I'm just going to call sun and sky from now on, it sounds less confusing that way. The sun and sky shaders share a lot of the same parameters. For example, here we see a multiplier parameter, as well as a haze, a red-blue shift, and saturation. If we go to the sky shader, we can see that here's the haze parameter. There's also a red-blue shift and a saturation and a multiplier. So a lot of these same parameters are shared between the two shaders. But in this case, the sky shader is going to be in control of most of the parameters from the sun shader, which is parameters like the multiplier, as well as the RGB unit conversion, the haze, red-blue shift. I think you get the idea. Okay, so in this video we're going to look at the sun shader, which is this one right here. And then in the next video, we'll look at the sky shader, because the sky shader is so big and has so many different parameters. I'll dedicate an entire video just to that. So right now, let's go ahead and let's close the Hypershade here for the moment. Okay. And I'm also going to go up here to list and turn off auto load selected attributes so we don't lose these parameters. And now I'm going to show you the sky. Let me minimize this attribute editor there. I don't want to close it. If we look at this very large city here, and we go to the center of the grid, which you can see is located right there. A little bit difficult to see, but navigate your scene in a little bit and you'll find it. You notice that there's a light here. Well, when we created the physical sky system a moment ago, it created those three shaders. It created the exposure shader for the lens, it created the sky shader and the sun shader, but it also created a directional light. So let's grab this directional light and let's just move it up. And let's scale it up too. Remember, because it's a directional light, it won't make a difference if it's here or here or here. The lighting is still going to be exactly the same. And it doesn't matter if it's small or if it's really big. The lighting is still going to remain the same because it's a directional light and it shoots parallel light rays. So it doesn't matter how big the icon is or where it is. What does matter, however, is the rotation of the object. Right now you can see it's at a bit of an angle pointing down. It's basically pretty close to an early afternoon midday sun. Okay, if I go ahead and I do an IPR here, let's do an IPR of this area right here. You notice that yes, it does look like an early afternoon. It looks like it's about 1 p.m., maybe noon in this little make-believe city. Let me move this a little bit out of the way so I can see the icon back there. If I take the sun directional icon there and I rotate it like this, you'll notice something very unique, something strange happens, but it's very cool. The time of day actually changed, and the lighting actually changed as well. Now it looks more like a late afternoon, maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I continue to rotate this, the angle of this sun, because that's what this light represents, is the sun, now it becomes this beautiful sunset. And another neat thing is, if I rotate my camera around to face that sun, I'll actually be able to see the sun. There's an actual sun on the horizon. And if I rotate the sun a little bit down at an angle to make it earlier in the day, the sun will actually change position in the sky and will adjust in brightness and intensity just as a real sun would. This is a great feature of Mental Ray from Maya and allows you to create very plausible, very realistic outdoor lighting schemes in a very easy way, as you can see. It's as easy as just rotating this sun icon and changing the time of day. Now we have ourselves a sort of mid-afternoon, and we can go back to a sunset. Or it can be dusk or dawn. Which, dusk is pretty much the same thing as a sunset. Duh. Okay. So it's a very awesome lighting system to use, and the beauty of it is that it's so easy to use. Now this lighting system can be used with Final Gathering. If you notice, we are rendering now with Final Gathering. If I go back to my render settings, you'll notice Final Gathering is on. And if you were to go back and replay this video, you would notice something very strange. I never actually went and manually turned on final gathering. When you create the physical sun and sky system up here, by hitting this create button, what it does, it creates the simple exposure shader for the camera. It creates the physical sky shader. It creates the physical sun shader. It creates this light here in our scene to represent the sun. And it also goes ahead and goes so far as to turn final gathering on for you. Isn't that great? Isn't that nice of Maya and Mental Ray to do for you? All of that work for you? That's simply fantastic. Okay, so we see how to control this sun. We see how we can control the look of the time of day, the position of the sun in our sky. Now I'm going to end this video here, now that you know how to set up the physical sky and sun system, which is actually very easy to do. And in the next video, I'm going to go ahead and move on to a couple of other things. Oh, no, actually, edit that video. I forgot. I got to go over the sun shader and do the shadow stuff. So start again in 3, 2, 1. Okay, now let's have a look at that sun shader a little bit more closely. I'm going to put this light about like this is pretty good. I'm going to close that. I'm going to zoom into an area over here so we can see some shadows. And I guess I'll zoom in here. It doesn't really matter where you zoom in, as long as you can see some shadows. So I'll render this out here. There we go, perfect. We can see that shadow pretty clearly. I can even zoom in a little bit right there. Actually, let me zoom in with the camera so it looks a little bit better. And it's easier for me to illustrate this for you, to point out and show you what's going on here. So I'll do render preview here. Okay, there we go. So we can see how the shadow looks. The shadow is working just like an area light shadow, where when the shadow is close to the object, it's very sharp, very defined. As the shadow gets farther away from the object, it starts to get a little bit of blurriness. Now, the sun shader works a little bit different than your standard area light. Your area light will severely blur out shadows the farther they are away from the object that's casting the shadows. With the sunlight, that effect is controlled a little bit better and mimics more the way that shadows work with the sun in the real world. So this looks much more realistic than using an actual area light, believe it or not. Okay? Now you notice that it's a little bit grainy. We can control that. Alright? Let me close that. And what I'm going to do is I'll go back to the attribute editor here. Good thing that I kept it open. I just minimized it so I can come back to it afterwards. So this is the MIA Physical Sun Shader attribute editor window. As you can see, we can't do anything with these yellow parameters because they're being controlled by the sky shader. But we can do something with some other parameters here. We have shadow softness. Shadow softness is set to a default of 1. This is the parameter that's giving us these soft, blurry shadows here that makes them look more realistic and nicer. If we set that to a value of 0, we're going to get very sharp shadows. It's the equivalent of using the regular ray trace shadows from a directional light or a point light, anything like that. This doesn't look like an area light and doesn't look like a very realistic sunlight either. So using the shadow softness of 1 is good. You can also blow that parameter out of proportion. You can increase the shadow softness to say 5 if you wanted to, and you can see we end up with super blurry shadows, which creates a lot of artifacting. To get rid of that artifacting, what you need to do is increase the samples down here. So right now by default it's set to 8, which is too small of a number. Let's double it to 16. You can see the shadows start to look better. If we go up to 32, shadows again start to improve. 64, the shadows start to improve greatly. Of course, the more shadow samples you add, the longer it's going to take to render. So let me go back to 8, and I'll decrease the shadow softness back to the default of 1. Okay. We also have this automatic photon energy parameter down here, and what this allows you to do, it allows you to change the way that photon energy is computed for this light. Now, if you remember, I did mention in the global illumination chapter that directional lights are no good for doing global illumination. That's because directional lights in Maya have no point of origin, so photons can't be calculated for directional lights. It just won't work. But when you're using the physical sun and sky system, you could shoot photons from this light. So I could actually use this system without final gathering, and I can use this system by using global illumination instead of final gathering if I wanted to. I don't recommend that you do that, however, because your results won't look that great and the results won't come out as nice as with final gathering. It looks best with final gathering. That's why it turns it on for you automatically. And it doesn't turn on global illumination because final gathering looks a lot better. Okay, so I'm going to close that attribute editor. That's going to do it for this window. I'm going to close that attribute editor window, and that's going to do it for this video. In the next video, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this physical sun and sky system, and we're going to look at the physical sky shader, some of the parameters there, and how we could change the look of it and do a lot of cool things with it. So I'll see you in the next video.